Hi, this is Tommy Stevens with K2 Enterprises, and welcome to a quick overview of how you can use Excel's Power Query feature to streamline your processes surrounding summarizing, analyzing, and reporting in Excel. In virtually all cases, those processes start with getting the necessary data into Excel, and, unfortunately for most business professionals, we believe that there is a tremendous amount of manual effort invested in that task. We also believe that once you understand the fundamentals associated with Power Query, you will be able to access your data in Excel much faster than you might have ever thought possible. So, let's go ahead and get started. In this example, we need to query data from an Access database into Excel. Now keep in mind that although I'm demonstrating pulling the data in from Access, Power Query currently supports 40 different data sources, even including open database connectivity, kind of a universal technology which facilitates connections from virtually all modern databases. To get started with Power Query, from the Data tab of the ribbon, I choose to click Get Data. Now, it's important to mention that I'm demonstrating out of Excel 2016. If you happen to be running Excel 2013 or Excel 2010, you do have access to Power Query via an add-in, and I'll expand on that a little bit later in this demonstration. And if you are using the add-in, your keystroke sequences will be slightly different than those that I'm demonstrating through Excel 2016. Clicking on Get Data, I choose to pull my information in from a database. Now remember, Power Query currently supports 40 different data types. In this simple example, I'm going to choose to pull data from Microsoft Access database. More specifically, the name of that database in this case is Contoso Sales. I select Contoso Sales, I click the Import button, and upon doing so, that causes Power Query to launch the Navigator window. In the Navigator, I indicate that I want to select multiple items by checking this box, and then I simply check boxes next to each of the 6 tables that I want to pull into Excel for reporting and analysis. Notice that in this example, I'm specifically excluding the DIM entity table. I do not need that for the analysis that I want to create. Having selected the 6 tables, I then move down to the Load section in the lower right-hand corner of Navigator. And upon clicking that drop-down arrow, I find that there are 2 options, Load and Load To. If I choose the Load option, that will load the data from these 6 tables directly into Excel's data model. Now, a full discussion of Excel's data model is far beyond the scope of this conversation. So in this example, we are going to choose the Load To function and tell Excel, more specifically, and tell Power Query that we want to load all of that data into 6 different tables, 1 table in Excel for each of the tables in the Access database. And notice that I'm also going to leave this checkbox enabled that says add this data to the data model for reasons that I'll expand on in just a few moments. I click OK, and that then launches the process of querying the data into Excel. It's important to note as these queries run that I previously could have also clicked Edit to modify the queries with data transformations, but I chose to hold off on that for now. We're going to modify the queries in just a few moments. You see currently that the queries are running in the Queries and Connections pane on the right side of the window, and there's 1 query for each of the 6 tables that are being brought into Excel. While this data loads, it's important to know that the Fact Sales table has approximately 2.2 million rows of data in it. Now, you're likely aware that an Excel worksheet can only support slightly more than 1 million rows of data. The good news here is that this really doesn't present a problem to us because we have chosen to bring the data into tables on the worksheets within the workbook, and also we have chosen to bring the data into Excel's data model. The data model is not bound by the million row limitation that is otherwise imposed by Excel. When I begin building any reports off of this data, I will build them from the data model, and therefore I will have access to all of my data, even though only the first approximately 1 million rows will show directly on the face of the worksheet. Okay, it looks like the queries have completed running and that all of the data is now available to us. As we click through each of the worksheets that were returned by the query, we can see that we have data for the channel table, the date table, the product table, the product subcategory table, the promotion table, and the sales table. All of that data has been linked into Excel by Power Query. If we ever need to refresh the data, we can do so using numerous methods. For example, from the Data tab of the ribbon, we could choose the Refresh All button to refresh all of the queries inside this workbook. We also could simply right-click on the face of any worksheet returned by the query, just a right-click and choose the Refresh option there. And we could simply click on the Refresh icon, which is on the far right-hand side of the Queries and Connections pane for each of the queries that have been created. Of course, what's important to understand is that we now have a live connection between our data source, in this case an Access database, and Excel. I have now clicked on the results from the channel query, that is the query supporting the DIM channel table, as you can see in the Queries and Connections pane. In taking a quick peek at this data, it appears as if there are some columns that I know I will not need when summarizing or analyzing or reporting on this data. For example, these three columns, the ETL load ID column, the load date column, and the update date column are not going to be useful to me down the road. So I think what I would like to do is to delete these three columns from my query. I can right-click on the query for this table in the Queries and Connections pane and then choose the Edit function to open up the query editor. With the query editor, I can make transformations to the data that is being brought into Excel. Now, these transformations can include many different things, including adding and deleting columns, merging and splitting columns, creating user-defined calculations, and even changing the format of the data. We'll keep it simple for now. In this transformation, I'm simply going to delete the three columns that I've identified as not being necessary from the channel table. To make that happen, I'll merely select those columns by holding down the Control key while I click in each column, and then click Remove Columns from the Home tab of the ribbon in the Query Editor. As you can see, those three columns have now been deleted. More specifically, those columns have been deleted permanently from this query. This, of course, means that each time I subsequently refresh or reuse this query, and keep in mind, I can reuse it in another workbook or I can even share it with others on my team, the data from the three deleted columns will no longer appear. This occurs because Power Query has saved that deletion as what is known as an applied step, and you can actually see the applied steps for this query near the lower right-hand corner. Each time I rerun this query, any transformation that has been saved as an applied step is automatically applied to the data. So that means that if I need to prepare, let's say, monthly reports from this data, I no longer have to manually transform the data to make it more useful each time that I need to prepare or update my reports. The applied steps takes care of this task for me. Now finally, what can we do with all of this data that we've queried? The answer is really pretty simple. Anything we want. After all, once the data is queried using Power Query, it is treated as any other data in Excel, meaning we can use it in formulas, we can build charts, we can create pivot tables and pivot charts. The sky's really the limit. And while the process of creating a pivot table is beyond the scope of this short video, you can see from the pivot table currently shown on the screen that our reports can be quite powerful. In this case, the pivot table is summarizing the sales activity of a large retail organization, and it's summarizing the data by year, that is by fiscal year, and also by channel, and then also within each of the channels we can drill in and see the data summarized at the product category level. Now keep in mind, all of that data is being brought in through the 6 different queries that we established via Power Query. Furthermore, because that data is brought in via Power Query, next month and when it's time to recreate or to update this report, I merely need to refresh my queries and I will have my report already prepared. Just think about the time savings that are offered by using Power Query. In closing, if you haven't taken a close look at Power Query, clearly now is the time to do so. It is fully integrated into Excel 2016, and if you happen to be running Excel 2013 or Excel 2010, you can download the free Power Query add-in from the Microsoft website. Regardless of what version of Excel you're using, once you begin utilizing Power Query, I think you will agree with me that it truly provides one-stop shopping for all of your data needs in Excel. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video to be useful.